If you love classic contemporary Christian music and the people that made it, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to help support us and keep us going. This is Stage Right, and I am your host, John Thorn. They say if you die with a handful of friends, you die a rich man. Well, I have several buses full, and I'm very excited to share them all with you. Welcome to Stage Right. I am your host, John Thorn. This is episode 34. So before I get to my guest, Jody McBrayer, today, I want to go back to what I was doing a few weeks ago and give you my top 5 songs from the Joe English Band album, What You Need. So my top 5 songs are as follows. Number 5, Yield to the Spirit. Number 4, I Will Follow You. Number 3, The First Stone. Number 2, Take the Cross. And number 1, the title track from the album, What You Need. Just a great, great song. When you listen to it, sonically it sounds dated because of the electronic drums and keyboard sounds and stuff. It sounds very 80s, but it's got great songs, great songs and great musicianship. So Joe English Band, What You Need. Go listen to it on YouTube and take it all in. So it's kind of funny. I am just one of 1,000 different people that came through Nashville and was part of Christian music and loved it and loved being part of it and love still being part of it. But I have a bizarre story. Like, I just have a very unique story. I've got lots of different circles. Like, I don't have just the White Heart Circle. I'm not just part of the Truth Circle. I've got a lot of different galaxies that converge and come together. So I wanted to tell you a story that happened just yesterday. And it's actually a 2-day story. It started yesterday and it carried over into today. I was on the phone with Stephen V. Taylor, not Steve Taylor, the rock guy, but Stephen V. Taylor, the producer. He actually just won Producer of the Year. And I was on a call with Steve yesterday. And he was telling me the story of how Roger Breland actually asked him to produce an album in the early 80s. It was the first album Steve had produced for Truth. And I said, well, I remember in the early 80s, Truth recording in Cleveland, Tennessee, they did 3 albums. They did Miracles, Second to None, and Keeper of My Heart. So I asked him, who did you use to play on those albums? Because I know you didn't use local guys, because I was going to Lee College in Cleveland at the time. And Steve said, well, I brought A players from Nashville over, and we stayed in Cleveland and recorded at Faith Studios, which I knew Faith Studios, but I had no idea who played on those albums. And I said, well, who did you use? And he said, well, I took Dan Huff, I took Gary Lunn, took Mark Gershmill. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Gersh is one of my best friends. I said, I ended up in Whiteheart years later. I had no idea Gersh played on a Truth album. So then Steve and I started talking about Gersh and about Whiteheart, and later, in Truth, when I was in Truth, Stephen found this song called Stumbling Block that Gersh wrote, and Truth recorded it. So we were talking about all of this stuff, about the first album Gersh played on, about the song he wrote that Stephen found that Truth cut. And all of a sudden, Gersh texts me, and his text pops up on the screen of my computer, and I laughed and said, oh my gosh, Steve, you're never going to guess who just texted me. Gersh just texted me. So when I got done with my call with Steve, I texted Gersh back and said, dude, were your ears burning? I actually was talking to Steve Taylor, and you came up in conversation. So we talked for a minute through text, and then this morning when I got up, he had responded again. I called Gersh. Okay, so Gersh and I are reliving this story that Steve Taylor told me yesterday on the phone. And we're talking about Faith Studios in the early 80s. We're talking about the 3 Truth albums. We're talking about the song Gersh wrote, Stumbling Block, that Truth recorded in 1987. And while I'm talking to Gersh, Kirk Sullivan from For Him called me. Now, what makes that significant are 2 things. First of all, Kirk was in Truth in the early 80s and recorded those albums that Steve Taylor produced. Kirk was also in Truth with me in 1987. Kirk was the soloist on the song Gersh wrote, Stumbling Block, that Steve Taylor found and put on a Truth album. So I said to Gersh, I said, dude, you're not going to believe who's trying to call me right now. And he said, who? And I said, Kirk Sullivan. I said, do you know who Kirk is? He's like, oh, yeah, he's from For Him. I said, well, it goes even deeper than that. Do you know who Kirk is? And he said, well, beyond that, no. And I said, Kirk was the soloist that sang your song that you wrote that Steve Taylor put on that Truth album, Stumbling Block. And Gersh said, no way. There's no way. And I said, dude, I'm going to screenshot Kirk's missed call on my phone so you know that I'm not just like making this up.
Hey Rockstar provides digital marketing software and services to generate more leads, more exposure, and more revenue for your business or organization. Let Hey Rockstar amplify your awesomeness. Okay,
Jody, I'm going to start at the very beginning with you because I want people, when this is over, to know who you are and how you ended up the amazing talent you are. So, what was the first album you remember buying with your own money?
Okay, so I have to tell you this. I just finished a book. I have to preempt this. I just finished a book. It's 99% autobiographical. I touch on a lot of mental health issues and things like that, and there's a couple of chapters that are specific about that. But it starts at the beginning, just like we are now. So this is kind of a short synopsis of that. But the Grease soundtrack was the first record I ever bought with my own money.
Oh my gosh!
And it was a double LP.
Okay, so what was your favorite song from that?
Oh, okay. I had a mad hard crush on Olivia Newton-John, like big time. Like I remember seeing the movie, which how funny is it? Because the lyrics to most of those songs were abhorrent. They were horrible. Like right. If you think about Grease Lightning or some others, I mean, it was pretty bad. And my parents didn't think twice about it, Just kind of shows the sort of house I lived in. But my favorite song on the record was probably Hopelessly Devoted to You because she sang it. And I just thought she was dreamy,
Dude, you're going to die. I had the 45.
Of that song?
I had that 45. That was my favorite song too. My sister probably heard that song 2,000 times in her bedroom, which was right next to mine. Oh, that was such a great song.
Oh, no question, man. It was. Well, she was so, literally, she was so beautiful. And
yep.
And her voice was so pure and just simple. I'm getting nice, sorry. I loved it, yeah. And I still do. I still listen to it every once in a while. And I've introduced my daughter to it now that she's almost 16. And I explained to her, Sarah Clayton, these words are not acceptable. You should not say these words. I try to. Right. But musically, it really wasn't an epic musical for back then.
No, but it was fun, though. It was fun.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So do you remember the first concert you went to?
Oh, man. I think the first real concert I went to was probably Amy Grant. I went to see, I lived in Tampa, Florida, and we have the Sun Dome in Tampa, Florida, which at the time was the only place where concerts could really happen. We didn't have a dome stadium or anything like that and Amy Grant came with her Unguarded tour, and I came to see her do all of her pop hits. That was Love Will Find a Way.
Yep.
How do you know? That record.
Oh, that's cool.
First concert.
Okay, so then who were your biggest musical influences on you as a singer?
Okay, so I grew up listening to a lot of R&B, like classic R&B music. My parents, especially my dad, loved just like the Commodores, and he loved Earth, Wind, and Fire and all that stuff. So I listened to a lot of that growing up, but I also loved the female voice.
Right.
I think probably because, especially when I was younger, it was easier for me to sing
right.
than some of the other stuff. So I listened to a lot of Aretha Franklin, Gladys Knight. I love Gladys Knight's voice. I still do.
Absolutely.
But Anita Baker, do you remember Anita Baker from the 80s?
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Which you're a bass player, right?
Yep.
Okay, so I you know who Nathan Easton is?
Oh yeah,
of course.
Yeah.
Well, Nathan played on all of her records, and phenomenal bass player. Nathan actually has a great solo record.
Yeah, it is. It's actually really, really good. I've got a copy of it.
So anyway, all that to say, she was probably the biggest musical influence on me mainstream, and then I think Amy Grant probably popped just because, obviously not vocally, she's a good singer, but she was never like. She was never a wow singer. She just had that kind of cool edge to her.
Yep.
But I just love the fact that she was not afraid to push the envelope and do some things that made the Baptist church raise their eyebrows a little bit.
Okay, so you brought up the Baptist church. Tell everybody how you were raised.
Well, I was raised in the Baptist church. My father, for as long as I can remember, as a child, I was in church on Sundays and Wednesdays, and
Yep.
sometimes even Fridays. And my dad got saved when I was like 3 or 4 years old, and my mom followed suit shortly after. And when my father accepted Christ, man, it was like Jesus pulled the rug out from under his feet, and he just,
Yeah.
he was in. And within a few years of being a Christian, he decided he needed to be in ministry. He was a postmaster by trade, but he got called to be a pastor. And, we just were church. So my dad was an ordained Baptist minister by the time I was 10 years old, I think. And, man, it was Baptist. Now he was cool too, because he was military. He spent several years in the Air Force, and he was the kind of guy that would sit down and have a beer with you and tell you about Jesus. And the Baptists didn't like that.
Right. Okay, so as a kid, did you feel your life changing as he went into the ministry?
Oh yeah. I mean, well, my brother. I had two older brothers, and there's a 5-year difference between myself and my middle brother. So that's a pretty drastic difference when you're at that age. They were already in high school while I was still in finishing up elementary school. So they were doing their own thing, living their own life, driving their own cars. And my dad really never made them go to church. He promised my mom, and I remember hearing him say this, that he was never going to force my brothers and I to go to church if we didn't want to, because that's, it has to be a choice. Just like God gives us a choice
Right.
to choose him or not. He said it has to be their free will. And honestly, they really stopped going once they were old enough to drive. And sadly, they've never gone back. Now, I'm not saying they don't believe in God or have some semblance of a relationship with him, but
Right.
They've never been big fans of the church. And, sadly, the church that we grew up in didn't give them a lot to be fans of.
Okay, so would you say it was your age then that kept you engaged in church?
Yes. Yeah, I think because I was younger and my dad was so involved, I got drug along to everything. And he pastored a small church for about 3 years, and he didn't like pastoring a church because he said he just didn't get along well with adults. So he decided to become a youth pastor instead.
Oh, wow.
And so he ended up, that was his true call. I think he realized when he started becoming a youth pastor, and he was still working for the Postal Service at the time. So
Sure.
This was a quote unquote part-time thing. But I think he realized that kids were just way more pliable and a lot more fun and a lot less cynical. And,
Right. Yep.
he liked working with kids better. And so, and that's when his ministry really exploded. That's when his heart really that's when his heart just became exposed. He was such a compassionate guy because he had sown so many wild oats as a kid. And he was, my dad was no wallflower. He danced on the tables, boy, and he lived life hard. And so a lot of times when you do those kind of things, you make some poor decisions, or you make some rash decisions and then think about it later.
Right.
And so he related a lot to teenagers, especially teenage boys. And it's interesting because when he passed away, I know we were talking about my dad more than me, but he's a big part of my story. But when he passed away, there were probably 350, 400 people at his memorial service. And at least half of them were kids and students and people that he had influenced or spoke into their life in one way or another. And for me, that was a huge motivational thing. I mean, I was like, wow, if I can do half what my father did in my lifetime, I'll be doing good.
Right. So were you the closest with your dad out of all your brothers?
Well, yeah. So another interesting thing is my mother was married previously, and she had my two brothers.
Okay.
And then they divorced. And when my dad married my mother, my oldest, Richard, was about 5 years old, and Jimmy was 3. So they really didn't know any other father than my dad.
Right.
Their father just wasn't in the picture all that much. And my dad picked up and raised them like they were his own. And they wanted to be adopted, but their real father, as much as he wasn't in the picture, he didn't want that to happen. So,
right.
But I was flesh and blood, McBrayer, my dad's first and only real born son. And so, we were definitely close. And then I looked just like him in every way. I still do to this day. I have a picture hanging up at the top of our staircase that's him holding me as a baby, and it looks like me holding my daughter.
Oh, wow.
It's crazy because and people used to say I was cloned, you know. So yes, we were very, very close.
That's awesome, dude. Okay, so before we move on, I've got to just ask this in honor of your dad. Do you ever dance on the tables?
Oh, I have, yeah. I'm a little bit older now, so I worry about hips and stuff. But yes, I have danced on the tables. I cannot lie.
Well, what a great tribute to your dad, Jody, just being the man that you are.
Well, thanks. He made a lot of really good decisions early on in life, and it's taken me a little bit longer to get there. And part of that was losing him. You know, he died at 56 when I was 30. I mean, he died in 2000, and
I remember that.
Man, it knocked the wind out of my sails. I just was not prepared for that. You know, I had just gotten married, and Avalon was blowing and going at the time.
Right.
And it just was bad timing all around. It's always bad timing when you do something you love, but 56 years old, you know, come on.
Right. How long would you say it took for you to gather yourself after that and feel like you had things together?
What's today?
Yeah.
You know, I think that what it did, honestly, if I can be real forthright, is it pulled back the curtain on so many things that I hadn't faced, because I put a lot of my eggs in my dad's basket.
Wow.
You know, he was not only did I love him and we have a great relationship, but he was my safety net, you know.
Sure.
Anytime I would do anything wrong or I'd get in any kind of trouble, or my dad always swept in and fixed it.
Wow.
You know. And so when he was gone, you know, that dancing on the tables part of me was still there. I still got into trouble, and you know, he wasn't there to fix it. So
right.
I think part of where I am right now is the fact that I am almost 51 years old, and my perspective has changed, you know, as far as who I am and who I am in Christ and who I am as a husband and a father.
Sure.
But, you know, it's a daily struggle. I'm going to tell you that. It's a daily struggle every day to think about.
Sure.
You know, he never met my daughter.
Oh.
And that's probably been one of the biggest disappointments of my life. And, you know, I have people who are friends of mine, Christian people that I look up to, say, oh, I believe that he met her. I think he picked her out in heaven. I think that they met. And, you know, and that's a great thought, but you just don't know. And you don't know how heaven works at all. You know, we have faith and we have hope that maybe in the purest moments of our lives, God allows them to look down and see us, or, you know, but who knows?
Right.
So it's still a struggle.
I'm sure it is. But what a miracle, though, that your dad got saved and changed the entire trajectory of your family, for your daughter, for her family, anyone that comes after her. Your bloodline was changed because your dad made the decision to accept Jesus into his life.
Yeah, it did. And, you know, the thing is I don't know. I've never really known my father other than a Christian. You know,
right.
I know him from stories, but he got saved when I was so young that the majority of my life he was a believer, and he went through a lot of stuff with church and a lot of pain and difficulty, and you know, some betrayal, and the church splits and all those things. You know, because everybody's like, "Oh, I'm so surprised that church split." I'm like, "Are you really? Don't let 6,000 people go to that church. They're people.
Right?
People lose patience with other people, and they make bad mistakes and decisions. And I'm not surprised that any church splits, because they get, you know, we all start to put our eyes on us and not on Christ. You know, we start to think about all the other stuff. And so my father experienced all of those things. So my whole life, I watched this kind of unfold with him, and I watched how he handled every situation. And I have to be honest, John, everything that he did, he was not a perfect man. He had a temper. He cussed like a sailor, which everybody's like, he was a pastor. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but yes, he was, and he cussed like a sailor. But his heart, he always led with his heart first.
Right.
And I saw lives change because of that. And that's the biggest influence that my father left with me, is to always lead with your heart first.
Right. Well, to me, when you sing, dude, your heart and your soul come out through your voice. It's remarkable. Okay, so let me transition to this. Did you sing in church, in youth group, or anything growing up? How did you get into singing?
I lived with that stigma my whole life of if you sing, you're a sissy, that kind of thing. Especially growing up with two brothers who were big into sports and athletics. I don't know that there was a sport in high school that my brothers didn't play.
Right.
And so coming up behind them a few years later, and now their last name was Massaro. So they weren't McBrayers, they were Massaros. My father was the FCA chaplain at the high school when my brothers were playing sports. They just assumed that his last name was Massaro too. So they would call him Mr. Massaro.
Right.
And my dad never corrected them. He never said, I'm not Mr. Massaro. I'm not, the people that knew, the people that didn't,
Yep.
And that just is another example of how awesome my dad was because he loved those boys. And
Yep.
he was, but all that to say, I had to follow them. And it was difficult because I came into high school with like almost zero athletic ability. It's not that I don't like sports because I do. I love football, college football, you forget it. I love it.
Right.
But I just, it just never came. It never came as easily for me as it did for my brothers. And they're Italian, and they're like, Italian gods. The kind of people that would be chiseled in like marble.
Right.
And here I am, just kind of like an orange on two toothpicks. You know what I mean? I just am not. I look like my daughter calls me Gru from Despicable Me. Yeah, because and I do. I look like, and I even wear all black most of the time. So I even call her sometimes. I go, Goro. It's just joking. I know. You've ever seen that? People who are listening and say they don't get it.
Be nicer to yourself.
But I did not start singing seriously until I was probably a junior in high school, just because of the stigma that was attached. I did play tennis some in high school and was pretty good at that. But again, still got made fun of because people didn't consider tennis as a real sport, which most of them, I'm like, you get out there and try to play. But
That's awesome. All right, so let me ask you this. How in the world, then, did you get exposed to truth or become aware of truth? How did you end up in truth?
Okay, so senior year in high school, by the time my senior year had come almost to an end, I was singing on the regular, and I was taking it very seriously, to the point to where by the time my junior year had ended, I was like, hey, there may be something to the singing thing because I sing and I get a response. I don't do nothing else like that happens. When I play tennis, nobody gives a crap, but I sing and people are like, wow, this is cool. So maybe there's something to this, And by the time my senior year rolled around, I was singing in an ensemble at school. I had gotten the role of Curly in Oklahoma and actually really loved that a lot. I'm not a big Broadway person, but that was a blast.
That is cool.
And so one of the girls that I went to school with that was older than me, a close family friend, she goes, hey, you should go see Truth. They're going to be at Carpenter's Home Church in Lakeland. You should go see them. They're a great group. You could sing with them. And I was like, really? I've never heard of Truth before. She goes, oh my gosh, they're awesome. You'd love them. And I was like, okay. And so this was Sunday morning at church, and they were at Carpenter's home that Sunday night.
Wow.
And it was Mark and Andy and Kirk and Marty, Alicia, Lisa Glasgow.
Dude, I was there.
I bet you were there because it was 1988.
Dude, that is so awesome. That's so cool.
And I went and sat. It was the floor of that place was packed. You know how big Carpenter's Home used to be, which is crazy. It's not there anymore. They tore it down. But it was massive church, 10,000 seats, I think. 10,000
seats. Yep.
The floor was full.
Wow.
And so we got there a little bit late, and we sat in the back, literally on the back row under the balcony. And I watched. I'll get upset. I'll get emotional. Sorry. I watched people sing and at the time worship. I didn't know what worship was,
right?
But I watched people express themselves while that music was being done. And I remember, I remember Andy singing Holy Polies that night and people standing up and raising their hands and worshiping. And,
right.
I've never seen anything like it in my life, dude, like nothing ever.
Wow.
And I think I cried the entire concert, and my dad did too, and my mom.
Oh, wow.
And by the time the concert was over, I looked at my dad. I said, I think I'm supposed to do this.
Oh.
And he said, I think you are too. And so just my dad being the way that he was. He, at that point, everybody was going down front and praying and gathered around the altar, and they were having a prayer time and altar call time, and Roger was doing his thing, pacing back and forth on the stage and talking, as Roger does.
Right.
And my dad grabbed my hand, and we walked all the way down that aisle, and we knelt right in front of Roger, and my dad grabbed his pant leg. I'll never forget it. Grabbed his pant leg, grabbed his Armani pant leg, and and pulled him down. And Roger got down on his knee, and he said, "This is my son." My dad said, "This is my son, and he wants to sing in your group."
Oh, wow.
Just being all forward. And Roger said, "Well, how old is your son?" And he said, "He's 16." And he goes, "Well, your son needs to go to college." And he goes, we don't take anybody until they've at least, gone to school. And he said, "Can he sing?" And my dad goes, "Yeah, he can sing." And he said, "Well," he goes, where would you suggest you go to school? Where's the best place to go and train, musically?" And Roger looked at me and said, "You need to go to Liberty University. That's where my sons are going this year. It's a great school. You should check it out."
Wow.
And we got up from that and, ended up going to Liberty. I ended up being roommates with Jason and Jeremy. And it just was so providential, and God had such a hand in it. Even though, I did some stupid dancing on the table things between then and
Sure.
but it's very obvious that God wanted me in truth. And I've never second guessed that. There are times in your life where everybody looks and goes, maybe this wasn't God's perfect will for my life. Maybe this was God's permissive will because I wouldn't shut up about something. But I know, I know that truth was God's perfect will. I know that that's where he wanted me to be, because a lot of the person that I am today that's good is because of truth and because of Roger Breland.
Right. Okay, so give me this. Tell me something you learned in truth that has stuck with you all of these years.
I think the biggest thing that I learned in truth is that it's not about me. It's not always about me,
Right.
I've never really, and I think anybody who's listening to this, if people are listening to this that know me, there's going to be people that like me and people that don't. I think whether you like me or you don't like me, I think the one thing that everybody will always say is, I'm not a cocky, arrogant guy. Like, I'm not I'm the best singer, because I'm not the best singer. There's always going to be somebody who sings better than me. There's always going to be somebody who can do something better than I can do. And I've always known that. And there's always going to be people who are closer to Christ and have a better walk than I do. But I think that's something that I learned in truth. And when I went into truth from Liberty, I was a star at Liberty.
Yeah.
I was a great singer. Everybody's like, "Oh, you're the best." And, you go into Liberty or to truth, and all of a sudden you're just one of many.
Right.
I went in with Russ Lee, and, Russ was singing his face off, and I'm like, I'm going to die out here. But I learned it. And, and I was out there with Mark. I remember Mike Childers when I first got in the group. I was so happy to be there. I was over the moon. And so I would get on the bus in the mornings and sing. And Mike had been there for like 16 years at that point or something. I don't know. And he was done. And I walked up on the bus one morning singing. I was like the last one on the bus. And he grabs my arm and he looks at me with those,
Right.
bags under his eyes, and he said, "You don't have to sing every time you get on this bus, boy." and I was like, well, crap. I just, it was all, that you were out there. As great as it was, there was always something that just kind of took the wind out of your sails,
Right.
all night drives or, whatever.
Right. Dude, Mike was on my podcast a few weeks ago, and I will tell you this, Mike in the morning is not the same Mike you get after lunch.
Well, who is?
I know, right?
Thankfully, I'm a coffee and a half in, or else this would not be going as well as it is right now.
That is so funny, though, that he said that to you. That is great. Now, yeah, Mike and I knew Mike from, I've known Mike since 1980. And we were both Church of God, and we went to Lee and all that stuff, both roomed with Mark Harris over the years and different things. But Mike joined Truth 2 weeks before me, and he didn't let me forget that he was there before me.
How long were you in Truth?
I was in Truth from the middle of August 87 to the middle of June 89.
Okay.
So I was there 2 months shy of 2 full years, and then I ended up in Nashville with Margaret Becker.
Okay. I love Margaret.
Yeah.
I haven't heard from her in a long time. Have you spoken to her at all?
I haven't talked to Margaret in a long time. I was in Nashville a couple years ago doing the Tennessee Sports Hall of Fame induction ceremony.
Yeah.
And I was staying with Kip Summers, who actually owns Arrington Vineyards down there south of Nashville.
I know Valerie and Kip really well.
Oh, very cool.
Valerie was our agent at William Morris when I was with
that's
Avalon.
right. Okay, so Val, I was staying with Kip and Val, and Kip surprised me because he was Margaret's keyboard player when I was out with Margaret.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so Kip surprised me. He invited James Dillingham, who played guitar with us, and Jeff Quimby, who played drums, to come over.
Oh, that's cool.
And we hung out, and Val cooked us dinner. She wouldn't hang out with us, but she cooked us dinner, and we hung out all night.
That's awesome. I think Margaret Becker was she was still on Sparrow when I first moved to Nashville and signed with Avalon and Sparrow. And she was really instrumental in just helping us and guiding us and giving us advice as to how to be an artist. And, I don't know, I just always respected her and her heart, and gosh, what a voice.
One of the best voices ever. And that night, actually, Val took a picture of all of us, and one of the guys sent it to Margaret, and she texted back and said, "Oh my God, the next time you guys do that, let me know, because she wants to come over and hang out and have dinner with us." So I do know this, her mentoring thing. She is mentoring artists, working with songwriters. I mean, that's one of her main things right now.
Oh, wow. I would love to just have coffee with her and hug her neck. Margaret, if you're listening, look me up, sister. I'd love to see you again. We did some early tour stuff. She was a well-established artist by the time we came up. But she was friends with Norman Miller, our manager, and with Glenda McNally. And I've always had a lot of respect for Margaret as a person.
Yeah, I love Margaret to death. Okay, so let's get to this, Jody. How did you go from Truth to then ending up in Avalon when you moved to Nashville?
Well, Avalon came about before I moved to Nashville. So,
oh wow!
People who have been in Truth, I mean, they know that I was in Truth for 2 years. I left. It was very scandalous. I left in the middle of the night. Blah blah blah.
Dancing on the table.
And that's one of those things I would never go into detail about. But it was kind of a mess. And I lived in California. Moved to California for 2 years. Worked for Disney. Did some different things out there. But I knew that God's hand was still on me, and that I was never going to be able to do anything in music ministry if I didn't get back to Nashville. So,
right.
And so about two years into my time in California, I got a call from Billy Breland, and Billy called me. May he rest in peace.
Yeah. Crazy
Billy. And he said, "Hey, Jody, I'm ready for you to come back to Truth." And I said, "Well, Billy, is that your call?" And plus he called me. It was like, he was on Central Time and I was in California. So he called me at 7 or 8 in the morning, but it was 6 a.m. in California.
Right.
And I'm like, Billy, I'm still asleep. And he said, "Well, I just want you to know, we've missed you. We need your voice and we want you back, and you're welcome back anytime. And I miss you." And I thought it was very sweet of him to call and say that.
Yeah.
And then he said, "Hey, by the way, Truth is at Skyline Wesleyan in San Diego next weekend. You should go see them."
Oh.
And so I went to see Truth. That was the first time I'd been back since I left. And of course, Roger's famous line was, "You said you'd be right back." The first thing he said when he saw me. But I ended up traveling with Truth again a few months later, and that's when we did the one album, which was me and Natalie Grant and Jana Long and Brad Parsley and Jason Breland and Michelle Pitzer.
Yeah.
It was really quite the group, if I do say so. I mean, I was, and that's another thing about singing with groups too, is you learn really quick that you are but one in a series of great singers. And
right. Man,
that group was crazy. But all that to say, Jana was being courted within 6 months of being with that group. She was being courted by Sparrow Records about Avalon. And we did Estes Park. Truth was the house band for Estes Park, and Grant Cunningham was at Estes Park. Grant was the A&R director at Sparrow. And he heard Jana and I sing, but they didn't need a guy. They already had 2 guys in place. They had Rick Kittleman, who was in Avalon, or was in Truth.
Yeah. And
they had Michael Passons. And so they didn't need another guy, but they needed a girl. And so he approached Jana at Estes Park and said, "Would you be interested?" And she said yes. So she covertly flew around when we had days off to try to have these meetings. And she ended up taking the position and leaving, much to all of our frustration, because we were, the one album was only about 6-7 months old at that time. And
Right.
Integrity had big plans for it, which never came to fruition. And it was a different record. I mean, come on, you guys that were Truth alums, when you listened to the one album, I guarantee you y'all hated it. Because it was so, I listened to it saying, why are we screaming? We're screaming. Like every vocalist, I'm like, oh my gosh. But I'm right. Am I right?
Yeah, you're a little right. It was not as Truth-esque as some of the others that had come before.
Wasn't. And I even to this, and Jason, I did Christmas at Jason Breland's church this past Christmas, and he and I always laugh about it too. There's parts of it that I love, like I love Trust, and I love the song I sang with Jana, and there's a couple of really great moments, but for the most part, it was such a departure that I'm not surprised it didn't do well. Yeah. I just think people, if we had gone maybe 50%, but we sort of went 150% in the opposite direction.
You went 50% while people were sleeping, and then 100% while they were paying attention.
Oh yeah, guaranteed. And the thing is, I think for people, like for the group that was there, it wasn't as big a deal.
Sure.
I think for Jason and I, because we had already been in Truth for so long, we could see how drastic it was.
Yeah.
Like The Mind of Christ and maybe there were really only 2 songs that even sounded like old Truth. But anyway, I digress. So Jana got courted. She left Truth. And I was bitter. I was frustrated because Jana and I were duet partners. We were close, and she was my buddy out there. And then a couple months later, she called and said, "Hey, we've had a development here where we need a guy. Would you be interested?" And because I had left and because of what had happened with Truth before, I just felt this fierce loyalty to JRB,
Right.
And so I didn't want to bail on him again. And I said, no. I said, I can't do that to him again. And she goes, okay, well, think about it, because this is a really big opportunity, and they're throwing everything plus the kitchen sink at this. And I said, okay, I'll pray about it. And I spoke to my parents about it, and my mom and dad were both like, Jody, are you crazy? You have to do this.
You were making what, $50 a week in Truth?
Yeah. Well, honestly, I was making a little bit more the second time around because I had a real job. I mean, I came from a real job. I had a real job in California. I was doing well, making decent money. And I told B, I said, look, I can't come back unless you at least pay me this. And
right.
He said, well, what about this? And I said, okay, that'll be fine. But long story short, I ended up taking the position. I flew to Nashville a couple of times. Roger didn't know. He didn't know I was doing it. And then finally, the last time that I had to come, it was just too much to keep a secret. So I told him, I said, hey, you need to know. And he said, well, do you think maybe you're going to take it? I said, well, if they offer it to me, I am. And so the call came. I flew to Nashville for the final time, met the group. We sang together a little bit. I flew back. And we had a day off in Kansas City, Kansas, and Grant Cunningham called me and said, hey, we want to extend an offer for you to be with Avalon. And
wow.
I accepted. And then it was rough. Roger got upset for a while. He was mad, and he had to I went and sang at a showcase for GMA with Avalon, and Truth happened to be at Bellevue Baptist in Memphis that night. And when I got back to Bellevue to sing, he was auditioning people for my part. So there were guys up there singing The Mind of Christ, and he just was not happy. He was frustrated with me, but
right.
We're okay now. We made peace.
Well, it's got to be hard on him having to replace amazing singers like you all the time. But I have a question. Did you ever imagine, was it in your wildest dreams what Avalon would become?
Well, I had no clue. I mean, and to this day still, like I'll look at, I'm not an accolade person. Like we've got the gold records and the doves and everything upstairs in a cabinet, upstairs in our bonus room where we used to be covered with Barbie doll toys and everything. Now my daughter's older, but I've never been one to put those things out. Like I don't put my awards on my mantle or things like that. Not because I don't think they're cool. I don't know. That's just not me.
Right.
But I never had any idea when I started that group that it was going to be as, I don't know, it was going to be as influential, I guess, in the industry as it ended up being. And
Right. Okay, so let me ask you this. Was there a high point in Avalon or something that you can point to that says that was really, really cool?
oh man. Well, I think the first high point for me was actually that meeting that I took before Kansas City, before I was made the offer.
Okay.
Because I remember flying to Nashville and going at the time. Well, it's still, the officers are still there. You know, the CCM industry's changed so much.
Yeah.
When this was happening, that was at the peak of Christian music. I mean,
Right.
you know, we're talking, they had these massive office buildings with 4 or 5 stories full of offices and distribution companies, and it was crazy. And so they picked me up with a car at the airport, drove me over to Maryland Farms, to where Sparrow EMI Christian was at the time, because EMI owned them, now they're Capital. And I walked in that office and sat in this massive lobby surrounded by pictures of CeCe Winans and Twyla Paris and Stephen Curtis Chapman and Carmen and all these artists that were just massive at the time, you know. And they were all part of the Sparrow EMI rockstar, and I'm just sitting there going, is this happening to me? You know, is this real? You know, am I really in Nashville at a record label getting ready to sign a record deal, you know? So that was a big deal for then. I guess I was 25 years old at the time.
Right.
And then, you know, I think I have to say the first time that we ever won a Dove Award, that was a pretty big deal. You know, I'd watched the Doves for a long time. And when we won that New Artist of the Year Dove, and that was influential too, because my wife was with me. We were just dating at the time, and we were actually broken up, but I asked her if she would go with me as my date. And she was going to tell me that at that night that she could never see me again. And then when I got up on stage to give my award acceptance thing, I looked out there and she was smiling back at me, and I knew that she was going to be my wife. It was like God said, yeah, you're going to marry that girl.
Oh, cool.
So that was pretty memorable. And then, you know, I think too, for me, probably just there are moments, you could say a million award moments and things like that, but like I remember the first time being in Houston, Texas, we sang at this place called Cynthia Woods Pavilion. It's an outdoor amphitheater, and you know, any place in Texas, you're going to have massive crowds. And this place was sold out. There's probably 6,000 people there that night, and you're getting up there and you're singing a song like "I Don't Want to Go," and you put your microphones down, and the entire audience is singing the song back to you.
Oh, wow.
And you're just like, oh my gosh, people listen to our music. People listen to you know what I mean? It's like you don't think about it because it's such a machine, and you're just kind of going through the motions. And then when people start singing your songs back to you, you're like, holy cow,
right.
this is getting through to people. So I think that'll always be one of the highlights for me of traveling, is just hearing people singing Testify to Love or singing a song like that back to you, you know?
Sure. So let me ask you this. You've been nominated for a bunch of awards and you've won a bunch of awards. Do you enjoy award shows, or are they stressful for you?
Oh, I hated them.
You hated them?
I hated them. I could try to pretend all along and say, I just hated it. I actually would take on extra duties during award shows because I don't like sitting in an audience. I don't like, you know, waiting for the anticipation of your name to be called or not be called. And honestly, every time we were ever nominated, except for one time, our name was called. So when we were nominated, we won. When we we just didn't get nominated a ton. And we've only won really 3. Avalon won 3 on our own. New Artist, Song, and 2 Song of the Year awards. But I would always take on extra duties like working with the GMA backstage and interviewing people as they came off stage.
You were the Ryan Seacrest of Avalon.
Yeah, I was. I love doing that stuff, and it took me out of the pressure of being that artist, you know. And then when we performed on there, it was always just such a, you know, it was fun. Look, there are people who go their whole life and would give anything to have that opportunity.
Sure.
So I don't want to make less of it. But the one year, I wrote about it in my book, but I'll give you the Cliff's Notes version. So the big year for us was the year we were nominated for 5 awards. We were nominated for Group of the Year, Artist of the Year, Inspirational Song of the Year, Pop Recorded Song of the Year, and Song of the Year.
Oh my gosh.
So, and that was your Testify to Love. So Testify to Love was nominated for Song of the Year and Recorded Song of the Year. And then Adam and I was nominated for Inspirational Song. We were Group of the Year and Artist of the Year.
Unbelievable.
We knew we weren't going to win Artist of the Year because that always went to Stephen Cruz Chapman.
Right.
So, so we knew we would win that one. But in the two inspirational and pop recorded songs were given in the pre-telecast. Well, we won the award for inspirational for Adam and I, and we won the award for pop for Testify to Love. So basically, what that said to us was, we have the number one song in both formats. So it would beg to differ that we were, it would make sense that we would be the Group of the Year, right?
Right.
Okay. So that year we opened the telecast with Testify to Love. And we are sitting backstage with this curtain. Now it's like 45 seconds before the curtain raises, and we have to start singing Testify to Love to open the entire Dove Awards. Okay.
Right.
And we're sitting back there all in our finest, all our clothes, they're patting our faces, final makeup, and our publicist is with an earshot. And she hears me say to the others, you guys, we won both awards in the pre-telecast. There's a good chance we're winning Group of the Year. Are you guys ready? Do you have your speeches? Are you ready? And they're like, oh, we're all so excited. Yeah, we're ready. She walks over to us, our publicist, and says, guys, I just want to let you know, Point of Grace is winning Group of the Year this year. You guys did not win. And they said, wait, I swear to you, this is exactly how it went. Point of Grace is won. You guys did not win. And we're live in 5, 4, and we're just like, what? And like, I'm sure the blood just flowed out of all of our faces. And it's so funny because we went back and watched that. Jana and I did. We were sitting in the studio a couple weeks ago. And we watched that performance, and she goes, do you realize how awful we felt when that curtain came up?
Unbelievable, dude. I cannot believe that.
And it's not because I think I was more disappointed with the fact that my publicist knew who won. It's just, I'm like, how did you?
Isn't she supposed to be on your side?
Yeah. Well, and I'm like, isn't this supposed to be like top secret? Like, isn't it supposed to be a secret? Apparently, the GMA is not as secretive as the Oscars, but yeah. So that's all my award show stories. And after that, I was just like, we did sing one more time on the Doves when we did a song with Aaron Neville, and that was fun just because we weren't nominated and there was no pressure, and we just showed up and sang and left. And my wife has actually won 3 Doves because she worked for a record label, so I got more nervous for her than I did for myself. Right.
So okay, but there's one you haven't mentioned.
Uh-oh.
Didn't you win an American Music Award?
I did. Yeah, we did. We did. We won an American Music Award for Inspirational Group of the Year. And it was in 2000.
Which has nothing to do with Christian music. It's an American Music Award.
Right. And it's voted on by your peers.
Yes.
I will say this, not to lessen the win, and this isn't false humility at all, but we were the only Christian artist to show up, and they had put that award in the live telecast that evening.
Right.
So there's a part of me that always wondered, because Dick Clark was still alive at the time, if Dick Clark was like, listen, Avalon showed up. We don't need a no-show in the Christian category.
Oh.
So we need to put their name on that ballot. And we even asked for the ballot afterwards to frame, and they wouldn't give it to us.
Oh, wow.
So I have a feeling, because it was POD, Jars of Clay, and Avalon. And at the time, POD was massive.
Yeah.
So, but they didn't show up. So look, it's not that the experience was unbelievable. And I remember having the Osbournes were hosting at the time, Ozzy Osbourne and Sharon, and you couldn't understand a word Ozzy was saying. He's like, and it's like, okay, whatever he said.
Did you get to meet Ozzy?
Yeah, we met. I shook their hands. They were very nice. All of them were very nice. And Kelly and her brother were there too, and they were very, very sweet. I don't think they knew what to make of the Christian thing. But the funny thing is we went backstage to press, and when you go to press at the AMAs, it's like every USA Today and Fox News, and everybody's there.
Right.
And you get up there and they say, "This is Avalon. They just won for Inspirational Group of the Year." And so I thought, nobody's going to ask us any questions. And I mean, they didn't stop asking questions. And the last question was, how do you feel about accepting an award, a Christian award for Inspiration Group of the Year from Ozzy Osbourne? And, the only thing I could think to say is God loves Ozzy just as much as he loves us.
That's perfect.
That's the only thing I could think to say, which had to be the Holy Spirit, because I'm not that smart. And it got printed in every newspaper the next day. Like, we looked it up in USA Today, and it said the last line, they must have serviced something, and they all pick up the same service.
Sure.
But the last line was Avalon Christian Group won for Inspirational Group of the Year. When asked how they felt about accepting an award from somebody who was, I don't know if it said adamantly non-Christian, their response was, God loves Ozzy as much as he loves us. So that went out to every single newspaper in the country. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, that might be the only time the news has reported something true.
Right, I know. Since.
Right. It wouldn't be beyond God to allow you to win that award because he knew what your response to that question was going to be.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, God, it was God's response. I told you, and again, that's not false humility. I'm not smart enough to come up with something that quickly, especially back then. If you ask me that now, I mean, I've got a little life on me, and
Yeah.
Jesus has made himself pretty real to me over the last 15 years. But that was 20 years ago, 2003.
Yeah.
So, I wasn't in that place, so that was definitely a God thing. And,
Right.
The American Music Awards cool. It's something that I showed my kid every time they would come on TV. She would always go, "Daddy, didn't you win one of those?" And I was like, "Yes." So, at least my kid thought I was cool.
Yeah, right on.
But we never won a Grammy though. That's the bummer. I would love to have a Grammy, just one.
Yeah, but you're not finished yet. And by the way, you're the only friend I have that's won an American Music Award.
Well,
Hey, do you know John Schlitt?
yeah, of course. Well, yes, because Petra beat Avalon.
Oh,
We were nominated 3 times, and one of the times Petra was in the same category with us, and they won that year. But I love John. He's a good guy.
yes, he is. All right, so let's keep this train rolling. Of all the albums that you've recorded and all the different artists and people you've sung with in the studio, do you have a most memorable recording studio experience, moment, memory?
Ooh, positive or negative?
Either. It can be either.
I think I struggle in the studio. I have to be honest. That's not my gift. If you were talking to Jana, like we just had this conversation because Avalon's in the process of doing a quote worship project, and Don Cook is working on it with us. He's producing, and Jada Marcus, and we were talking about it because there's a lot of downtime because Don tends to create slowly. So I asked Jen, I said, "Do you feel like you're better in the studio or live?" And she goes, "Oh, in the studio." And see, I'd prefer to sing live all day long.
Right.
I just kind of thrive off of the audience and the people and the emotion of live performance, and the studio is just sterile to me. And I don't know, it feels like a hospital. So I don't have a lot of great studio experiences. My first experience with Truth in the studio, being at that little studio in Orlando where we recorded More Than You'll Ever Imagine,
Mm-hmm.
the record that had So Far So Good and Power of Praise on it. And,
Right.
that was a nightmare. It was awful. It was terrible.
Wow.
And all this stuff, again, I wrote about it in my book, but the Cliff's Notes version is me showing up to sing. I think Power of Praise was the first song. And then it was really my first time ever being a professional in the studio. And Don was at the helm, but I don't know that Don was there that day. I think Stephen V was actually doing it. They were sharing the responsibilities of that record.
Okay.
And I got in and sang and just kept making a lot of mistakes and couldn't get it right. And I made a comment, and there was a studio tech that they had brought from Nashville, who was a pretty fairly successful guy. They brought their own tech in, and I said something like, "Well, there goes my professional singing career." And apparently, now maybe they didn't care. Maybe he knew the talkback button was down, but the response was, "Well, we don't have to worry about that." And they both started kind of laughing and then
Oh my gosh.
immediately saying things about my voice.
No way.
So yeah. And that was a hard thing for me to get past. And it's been a hard thing to this day. Now, Don and I talked about it, and Don says that it was him and he asked me to step out of the studio because he didn't like my voice. I don't remember that part of it. I just remember it being, it kind of left a mark on me, and that could be why I struggle with the studio to this day. It's just not comfortable for me.
Wow. What a weird thing for somebody that's hired to come in and work on a project to say to an artist.
It's not, I mean, is it weird really? I mean, everybody has stuff that happens in their past that leaves it.
Wow. That's just bizarre to me, because when you hire someone to come in and help you on an album, produce, engineer, whatever, they are there to help bring the best out in you, not crush your soul.
Well, I don't think that they thought I don't think they thought I heard them. I don't think they didn't think they were squishing me because I couldn't hear them, quote unquote. But, I've grown past a lot of stuff in my life, and that's been something that I've had to. And I've struggled with it even going into the studio with Avalon now, and working with Don. And I adore Don Cook. I do. He's a gifted, talented songwriter, producer, and I love him. But I can't say that doesn't still creep in, and I don't still think,
right?
Does he really? Now, let me tell you, he loves him some Andy Chrisman.
Andy Chrisman.
Oh my gosh, he talks about Andy all the time. I'm pretty sure Andy's his favorite vocalist that he's ever produced.
Man, that's just wild. I would think as a producer, you would want to make every artist you worked with feel like they were your best or your favorite.
When I turned like 45, and I don't know if you've had this moment, if you had this in your life, I know a lot of people have, but this switch kind of flipped in me where, I don't know, I just don't give a crap anymore. You know what I mean? Like, I don't worry about what people think about me. And if you do something wrong to someone that I love, I'm going to call you out on it. You can do stuff wrong to me all day long because I don't care. But if you do something to somebody I love, I'm going to point it out. I'm going to let you know. And, with Don, it's kind of been that way. I've kind of just said, hey, what you did hurt me, and it's a struggle. And so I think he overcompensates for it now. Like I notice sometimes, like, Jody, I was stellar. That was so, so great. And I know it wasn't stellar, and I know it wasn't great, but at least he's trying.
Right. Well, when you're wrong about somebody like that, I mean, everybody else loves you. So it's very possible that he actually is overly encouraging because he knows who you became, right?
Yes, I do think there's something to do with that. And he's made comments, and again, I'm just quoting.
Sure.
But he's like, you're Jody freaking McBrayer, he'll say stuff like that, and which means nothing to me and to most people. But I think he just says it to try to make me feel better. And I appreciate it. Look, he's considerate of my feelings and considerate of how I felt about what happened in the past. And
right.
I mean, I wish that we could say that about a lot of people in our lives, so.
Absolutely.
But he also is getting paid to work with us. So there's that. So.
Hey Rockstar provides digital marketing software and services for your church to generate more interest, create more exposure, and reach more people. Let Hey Rockstar amplify the awesomeness of your ministry. And, as always, Hey Rockstar is a proud sponsor of the Stage Right with John Thorn podcast.
Thanks for taking time to listen today. My thanks to Hey Rockstar. My special thanks to Jody McBrayer for being my guest next Friday, 12 noon, part 2 of my conversation with Jody. Have a fantastic week.